Welcome to the Intentional Pause podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Sopa, but you can call me Dr. Chris. Each week, we'll explore personal growth, self-awareness, leadership, and the power of slowing down in a fast-moving world, where we create space to slow down, hear your own voice again, and make more intentional choices in work and life. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. All right. Today, we are talking about a really important topic. We are talking about perfectionism, and this broadcast is brought to you by a recovering perfectionist, I must say. This one is near and dear to my heart because when I say recovering perfectionist, I am not kidding. I still sometimes struggle with this, and you will see why as we go through this. Perfectionism is what has made me sick in the past, of that striving to, I have to be this, I have to be that, I have to be everything to everybody, I have to do it perfectly. There are good things to perfectionism, but some not so good things, and we are going to talk about them both today, okay? So if you are a perfectionist out there or a recovering perfectionist, buckle your seatbelts. I think this is going to be a good one for you. So let's start with the definition of perfectionism, because perfectionism isn't just wanting to do things well. It is this idea that if I don't make a mistake and I'm flawless, that I'll be accepted, that I'll be successful, and that I'm worthy. Perfectionism is a self-worth issue. And I tell you that wholeheartedly from experience. It is a self-worth issue. You feel like if you make a mistake and you don't do something perfect, you're not worthy of people's time, of everything, okay? So it is not that you failed if you weren't perfect, because that is what perfectionism, when we talk about the definition, it means anything less than perfect, then I must have failed. And that mindset is completely driven by fear and control. For me, it was both. It was mostly control. You know, I still work on the control aspect. But sometimes when we're perfect and we try so hard to not make a mistake, it does the absolute opposite, because we manifest what we don't want. Okay? So I want you to think of perfectionism as a self-worth issue as we talk about this, and just keep that hat on for a little bit. If you are thinking to yourself, I'm not a perfectionist, or I don't know if I am, let me give you some signs, all right? So if you are a perfectionist, these are some of the things that I've experienced in my journey through this, is, as we've mentioned, a fear of making mistakes. That's a big one. If you have difficulty finishing projects because it's just never good enough, that's another one. Constant overthinking. You know, that Overthinkers Anonymous category, that is a sign. Being overly self-critical. Setting impossibly high standards, which is very different than striving for success and setting high standards. But when you're a perfectionist, you set impossibly high ones that are you just can't reach. Maybe you avoid new opportunities because they're new, you don't know much about it, and you're afraid you're going to fail. You usually will believe good enough is not enough. Like it's just never enough. You know, you don't want to do good enough. You've got to do beyond that. And again, this is different than pursuing excellence. We're talking about perfectionism. For me, the way this showed up mostly, though, was this constant worrying about what other people were thinking of me. Because in my brain somewhere, I thought if I were perfect and if I don't make mistakes, then people will like me. Then I'll be accepted, or maybe people won't leave me and abandon me. And a lot of this is, there's a lot of psychology behind whatever drives this for you, which we don't have time to go into today. But I want you to think about, if you do relate to this idea of being a perfectionist and striving for perfection rather than excellence, I want you to think about which one of those resonated with you, which one drives it for you, and why. Because the question to ask yourself is, am I pursuing excellence or am I trying to prove my worth? And that's where this comes back to self-worth. Is for me, I was trying to prove my worth. I thought being perfect meant I was worthy to be in the circle, to be in the relationship, to be at that job. That's what I thought it was. And I learned very quickly it wasn't. So I want to flip the script for a minute because there are benefits to perfectionism. Just like with everything, there's another side of a coin, all right? And this is important because perfectionism develops for a reason. Perfectionism helps people succeed because some of the things that perfectionists do and the strengths they have is they usually have very strong attention to detail. They have very high personal standards. They're reliable. They're thorough. They prep like no one's business. Like a perfectionist, you know that they are ready and prepped to go. I am, for these podcasts, I was actually just saying to my producer, Bill, I like have 6 pages in front of me. You can probably see them right here. I over-prepare. So you see, I still struggle with this, okay? Quality of work. They have a very high quality of work. Very strong work ethic. Conscientiousness, out the wazoo, conscientious. And they have a very high pride in their craftsmanship, whatever it is that they do. So many successful professionals and people possess these qualities. And the problem isn't high standards. It's when those high standards become impossible standards or standards where I have to do this all the time. I have to one-up myself all the time. That is when perfectionism leads to stress and it leads to burnout and it leads to illness. Okay, because again, it comes back to self-worth. The same quality that helps people produce exceptional work can keep you from believing things are good enough. Okay. For example, a strong work ethic. Let's take that one. All right. Strong work ethic can lead to that burnout we talked about. Why? Because you spend long hours working, more so than you need to, because you feel like a project needs to be perfect or done a certain way. So a project that might take you 2 hours normally will take a perfectionist 4 or 5 because it's never right. They always want to tweak it. All right. Another way is, if I am highly reliable, which is a strength of being a perfectionist, that might manifest as me having a hard time saying no. Because I want to show, hey, I want them to know I'm reliable, so I'm going to say yes to everything. And then I have a hard time saying no, and then now I'm in another bucket of water because I can't manage my time and I'm stressed out and I have too many commitments and I'm overextended. So that's how these turn, okay? But there are benefits, and I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that there is a good piece to this. It's just when it takes that tipping point over, because then there are costs to perfectionism as well. All right. So if you've related to this, I want you to listen to some of these costs, and I want you to see if these resonate at all, because one of the costs is analysis paralysis. If you're a perfectionist, I know that you have been caught in this where you just spend so much time thinking that you can't make a decision. You end up in this loop where you could see all sides of it and you think of all the pros and cons and all of the consequences, and then all of a sudden you just can't make a decision at all. So that's one. Another one is procrastination, because you have such a fear of it not being perfect that you just don't want to start, or you never start. Right? You think I'll start when I'm ready. I'll start when I have all of the information. I mean, I have wanted to do a podcast for like 6 years, and for me, one of the things I know that shows up for me is I'm like, oh, I've got to research it. That PhD brain of mine, I got to research it. I got to read all the books. I got to do all this. And what happens is you keep making that list longer and longer and longer, and all of that overthinking leads to no action at all. All right. Burnout. This is where it's hard to say no. You never feel like you're finished. Okay. You're working those long hours. So it can lead to burnout. A fear of feedback. People who tend to run this perfectionistic pattern usually take feedback very personally. And I know I did when I was working in corporate. I took feedback as almost like a personal affront. Why? Because in my brain, I worked so hard and so many hours to make sure I did it right. How dare you give me feedback on it because it was perfect in my brain. And that happens a lot in a perfectionist brain, is because you're trying so hard to be perfect that you've put all this work in, but sometimes that attention to detail slips. And now all of a sudden someone's giving you feedback and you're taking any criticism personally instead of it being helpful. Big one I see with my coaching clients is a difficulty delegating, right? And I know a lot of my formal leaders in corporate out there are going to be able to relate to this one, but usually you have a difficulty delegating because no one can do it as good as you or as quick as you. I hear both of them. No one can do it as good. They won't do it how I want it done, or they're not going to do it fast enough, right? And that is also a cost of perfectionism as well. Remember, if you're a leader, you build other leaders. That is part of your responsibility. And one way to do that is through delegating, allowing other people to make mistakes, allowing other people to learn, and you have to delegate to do that. Another one is reduced creativity, because you are so focused on being perfect and every T being crossed and every I being dotted that you lose that sense of creativity, because creativity requires experimentation. And when I was working on my perfectionism, one of the things I did, and it was super scary, but I took a painting class. And I didn't just take a painting class. I took oil painting, which is even more difficult because you got to mix it with this substrate and there's all this stuff you have to do. And I did it on purpose because painting is one of those things that you cannot be perfect. Like if you make a mistake on the canvas, good artists turn that mistake into something else. You know, they have that creative mind. It's not, they don't look at that like, oh, I made a mistake. They look at it like, wow, where is that leading me? What can I do with that line or that dot that fell on the canvas? And I did that on purpose. And it was hard at first. It was really hard. But then I just had to keep reminding myself, like, you know what? Nope, it's okay. Like, this is about creativity. Just let it flow. Just let it flow. Just let it flow. And it really worked. And I ended up enjoying it. And I found out I wasn't that bad at painting either. I've actually painted some really good pieces. And so that's a fun one. The other thing, if you're a formal leader, I want you to understand here is that if you are looking for a team that is innovative, innovation requires making mistakes. It requires making mistakes. You have to try things. You have to take risks. You have to do that. And so make sure that you are fostering that it's okay to make mistakes. It is okay to be creative and take risks. So then you will have a really innovative team. Damaged relationships is the last one I want to talk about here, because sometimes perfectionism isn't always directed inward. Right? It's not always what I think of myself and expectations I have of myself. But what we do is we often project those expectations we have on ourselves onto others. So if I'm very judgmental of myself, more than likely I'm going to be very judgmental of other people. If I expect perfection from myself, and I can tell you this was true with me, I expected perfection from other people as well. And you don't do this consciously, and you don't do it to be mean, but you do it, and you project it, and people feel it. And it creates frustration. It creates micromanagement. If you're a manager, it creates completely unrealistic expectations. All right, so just pay attention to where you're projecting this, all right? Because perfectionism is really rooted in fear and control. And remember, fear, false evidence appearing real is what fear is. All right. Mine was fear, but it was really mostly I felt like if I could control things, then everything was going to be okay. All of those fears I had would be subsided, right? So they kind of went hand in hand there. Perfectionism, we think, protects us from certain things. So we think if we're perfect, that perfectionism is going to protect us from being rejected. Maybe it's going to protect us from being criticized or embarrassed or disappointed with people or our environment. We think it's going to protect us from failing or feeling like we're not enough. And so instead of asking yourself, like, how can I be perfect? I want you to think about this question. I want you to ask yourself, what am I afraid of will happen if I'm not perfect? I want you to get to the root of the fear. And if you remember me saying in one of my episodes, I said that a lot of times people don't like to pause and reflect because it brings up things that we don't like. I call it that dirty sock syndrome. Those things we don't like about ourselves that we don't want to think about. But you need to do that. You need to be able to pause and ask yourself questions like this one, So what am I so afraid of? What do I think is going to happen if I'm not perfect? Right? And see what answers come up for you, because this is real. The fear for this one is very visceral. You can feel it physically. It is so powerful in your brain that you can feel your heart racing, you start to sweat. Like, it is a very visceral response, this one. And so think of what you fear, and it could be multiple things. And we've listed some already, but maybe it's a fear of what other people think, or being judged, or someone leaving you. A lot of people fear the unknown. That's a really big one. Not feeling worthy, like if I don't do it right, then I'm not worth it. Or others might not like me if I'm not perfect. These are all of the ones that we've talked about. So this question really changes anything, because the goal here with this question is to remove fear from the driver's seat. You never, ever want to make a decision based in fear. Never. All right? You want to make decisions based on a grounded, solid, confident place and an intentional place. So you want to take fear out of the driver's seat with this question. So how do you do this? What are some ways to overcome perfectionism? I'm going to talk to you about some things I did. All right. One of the things I did is I changed the word perfectionism to excellence. Okay. So instead of aiming for excellence or for perfection, I aimed for excellence. I didn't look for everything being flawless. I asked myself all the time, and I still do this, like, what is the outcome I'm looking for? All right, what's required of me in this situation, but what's my ultimate outcome? Instead of asking myself, like, what would perfect look like? Because that's what I used to do. What would it look like if it were perfect? And it has to be perfect. Now I'm like, all right, what's the outcome? And however I get to that outcome is how I get to it. And sometimes that brings magic. The unknown is a beautiful place to live when you can start to let go of control, because that's where surprises come up. That's where things come up that are the unexpected that actually make something even better. Okay, so that was the first thing I did. Then I also started to set deadlines for myself. So completion points, deadlines, whatever you want to call them. Because one of the things I found with myself is that it was never done. Okay, things were never done because I always wanted to tweak it. I always wanted to go back to it. So I started to define, okay, this is complete when, or this decision, I need to make a decision when. So for like making a decision, for me, this helps me not overthink. When I have 70% of the information, then I'm like, I'm good. All right, I can go. I also watch my feelings, because I can tell when I go into perfectionism and overthinking, and this is how. And I use the example of buying my house. So I bought a house about 3 years ago out here in Peoria, Arizona. And when I was in the process of deciding whether or not this was the house I wanted to buy, I obviously had to think about things, and I had to weigh things. And I was excited. My feelings were excitement and, oh my gosh, this is great. Positive emotions. The minute my feelings turned negative, I'm worried, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, angry, whatever it was, mostly worried for me, then I knew I was overthinking. And that's when I would pause, take a step back. I'd have to walk away from it for a little bit and look at the facts, because you also start to tell yourself story when you get into that worrying, negative state. And so that's my little point, so I make a completion date. This is complete when, or I need to make the decision when, and then I monitor my feelings and I see when my feelings shift. And so that's a good kind of temperature check for you as well. And then I talked about, the painting of taking up painting. And I did that because I wanted to practice imperfection. I thought about it as imperfection in action. And this can you don't have to take painting like I did, but this could look like deliberately sending an email or making a phone call that you're scared about, or, publishing, something on social media. For me, recording a podcast, doing this podcast was a big thing. I've wanted to do this for years, and I kept finding something to hold me back, and I don't know what topic, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know how to do it, and you finally sometimes just have to bite the bullet and learn as you go. It's kind of that I'm going to learn to fly the airplane while I'm flying it. I'm going to jump in and just go. So, any of those things that you're thinking about doing that have been hanging out there, I want you to just do it. I want you to just take a little step towards it, okay? Don't worry about it being perfect, just do it. Practice imperfect in action. I also want you to reframe mistakes. I don't want you to think about mistakes as a bad thing. I want you to think about mistakes as a learning tool, because that's really what mistakes are. It is a way for you to learn. It's like, whoop, that didn't work. All right, now what? What's next? That is your question. What's next? Because a mistake is simply, it's not a flaw, a character flaw, and it is not a mark on your soul. All a mistake is, wow, that didn't work, or that didn't go the way I wanted to. I didn't say what I wanted to say. What did I learn from it? Because remember, it is not about what you did or what you said. It is more about how you recover. You are human. We are going to make mistakes. We are meant to make mistakes as human. We are not here to be perfect, because that mistakes is a vehicle for us to learn. You have to make mistakes to grow. All right. So reframe how you think about mistakes, and included in that failure. How are you defining failure? Because you're really not failing either. Failing is in that same bucket with mistakes. It is a learning tool. It's another opportunity. All right. And lastly, I want you to celebrate your progress. And I want you to do kind of what I call an after action review. I teach this to all my clients, and I do this myself. So after an interaction, after something you do, I want you to ask yourself this series of questions. Okay. And they're the same 4 questions in the same order all of the time. What did I do well? What would I never do again? What did I learn? And then what would I do differently next time? And so if you make a mistake, if you're not perfect, that is the mindset I want you to have. What did I learn? What did I do well? What will I never do again? What would I do differently next time? Okay? You're putting what you learned into action that way, because you're doing this instead of asking, gosh, I still wasn't good enough. Why wasn't I good enough? Right now you're improving with mistakes. Now you're moving forward. That's what I want you to do. Okay. So some reflection questions for you as we kind of close here is, I want you to ask yourself some things and really reflect on these. Put pen to paper. If you have a journal, journal some of this stuff. But I want you to ask yourself, where is perfection keeping me stuck? All right. What opportunity have I delayed because I don't feel ready, or I don't feel like I have enough information, because that perfectionism is running the show? What would I do this week if I wasn't afraid of getting it wrong? What would you do? Is my pursuit of perfection helping me grow, or is it preventing me from moving forward? Because it's probably helping you in one sense. So you have to identify, where is it helping me? Where is it not? And if you're a people leader in an organization, I want you to hear this one, okay? Because leaders who model healthy imperfection, all right, not perfection, but imperfection, you create psychologically safe teams. Because psychological safety is an environment where people are not afraid to make a mistake. They're not afraid to be themselves. They're not afraid to speak up. And when you are an imperfect leader and you're vulnerable enough to allow yourself to make mistakes and allow your team to make mistakes without micromanaging, you are developing an amazing culture with psychological safety. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, moving on, our pause with purpose moment. Here is what I want you to do this week, is I want you to think of one thing you've been overthinking, all right, or something that you cannot do perfectly, all right? Whatever it is. I want you to think about one thing. And I want you to just notice it, and I want you to work on it. I want you to take one step using some of the practical tips we talked about in the direction of, okay, I've been overthinking this one for a while. What do I need to do to break this habit, to not overthink it? Where do I need to stop? Where do I need to draw the line? Or maybe there's something that you've been avoiding doing because you know you can't do it perfectly. I want you to take a step into it. I want you to try it. I want you to allow yourself to make a mistake. Feel it. See what it feels like. Challenge your mindset, okay? That is your goal today. And so, hey, I don't know. I thought this was a pretty perfect episode. How about you? It was pretty good. So with that, I'm going to close out here. I'm going to thank you for joining me. Please share this with anyone who you think could resonate with this message. Again, we are wanting to get this word out to everyone, just to take that intentional pause. Be sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you follow us on any of the podcast platforms you listen to. Follow us on Instagram. Feel free to send me questions, DM me on Instagram, whatever you need to do. And again, thanks for joining us today, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of The Intentional Pause. My hope is that something you heard today really encourages you and helps you slow down, reflect, and make space for what matters most. If you enjoyed this conversation, which I know I did, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with somebody who could use an intentional pause in their life or who could relate to the story. If you have a story you want to share or a question, please leave a comment. And if you want to talk to me about leadership development programs for your organization, some executive coaching maybe, or a keynote for an event, my contact info is in the show notes. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Sopa, and until next time, take care of yourself, trust the process, and remember, slowing down is not a weakness, it's where the power lies.